It's often like those from the Austrian school haven't done the work to understand what Bitcoin actually is. And that's often the thing as well. Like from an economic literacy perspective, that's definitely an issue. Even if you have complete understanding of economics, you don't you have to do the level of work to understand Bitcoin, then you also won't get across the line. I point out the inflation bug constantly is because it draws them back to the point that, they talk about, there was consensus to change like that. That was an actual bug. Like if you don't have a frame of reference, Bitcoin has no purpose. Bitcoin can be a file storage system. Bitcoin is whatever it is. Like the system is what it says it is. It's like, well, then how do you know what a bug is? And like, there was consensus at that time that it was a bug. It's like, yeah, based on what? And I've never got an answer. It's like a nirvana fallacy of instead of understanding that like you can't ever get rid of spam, but that doesn't mean you shouldn't be taking steps like to mitigate it.
Here's an idea for you. Come and see me and Luke in Prague, my favorite European city.
With over 100 world-class speakers and the chance to meet more than 100 leading Bitcoin companies, this is where ideas flourish, connections are made, and Bitcoin's path forward is forged together with 10,000 enthusiasts and professionals.
In Prague, people have been fighting for freedom since forever. So it's only natural that Prague is the Bitcoin capital of Europe. You should be there.
With 3 days of keynotes, panels, and side events, BTC Prague is the place to be for pure Bitcoin-only signal.
And the beer is just fantastic.
Use discount code FREEDOM for 10% off your ticket and another 5% discount if you pay with Bitcoin.
So remember, use code FREEDOM and see you in Prague.
Conza, welcome to the Freedom Footprint Show. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you for having me, guys.
Yeah, welcome, Conza. One of my favorite stupidity debunkers on Twitter. You are a great thinker in the Austrian school of economics, I would say, and a really good teacher to normies who don't know what they're talking about. And also, you like to point out that these thoughts in the Misesian tradition are not like opinions, and they're not optional. They are a very rigid branch of science. But first of all, please introduce yourself to our listeners who don't know who you are.
Yeah, so Conza, real life nickname, and you find that on most socials, YouTube and obviously Twitter. And I guess background, kind of a son or a product of the Ron Paul revolution. That was kind of the entry point to Austrian economics. Understanding Mises and praxeology and all that world. Probably there's a co-founder of the Mises Seminar Australia, so brought out Hans Hermann Hoppe, Walter Block, Jeffrey Tucker back in 2011 to Australia, and 12 and 2013. So it was a while back, but it was kind of speaking to the remnant, bringing those people who are interested in the same ideas down under, or collecting the locally, and then also bringing international, the big names, big thinkers. Thank you for the intro. I'd probably say I'm a great secondhand dealer in ideas, where I've often found, instead of writing myself and being, producing content myself, it's often having digested it. My personality is a bit more towards collecting, or like condensing the best gems or the things that have convinced me over time, especially like engaging online, seeing the same areas over and over, where I kind of like get sick of that and trying to become more efficient at that in terms of like storing really good critiques or about particular ideas or references, and is kind of responding and planting trailheads for others to follow, because I used to think that the same thing that they do, and I realized I was wrong. Kind of key thing for me in terms of values, being intellectually honest. And I think if you're not that, you can't grow. You're not a human in the sense of being able to improve, and there's a strategic element to that as well, of instead of perhaps sometimes it's convincing others. As Bitcoiners, it's not so much maybe the understanding someone has a problem and what like they need to know what the problem is before they can accept the solution, but often presenting yourself as one kind of improved unit. There's Lenny Reed kind of talks about, and a few others, where being successful, understanding, and do that, I think you need to understand reality well. So the decisions you make, the means you use to obtain certain ends, whether they are possible or not, and what is the correct approach. And you can kind of dismiss those that are impossible or aren't going to achieve your results. And so you can be more efficient and effective. And thus, consequently, how you are as an individual can bring more people to your way of ideas. And there's a Lenny Reed, there's an awesome little clip where he's in a dark room in a lecture theater, and it's got a light, and you're really kind of small, and it's not so much what stage that light is at, but it's that growth. that improving as a unit, and then it turns the light up, and then it's kind of the brightness and the attraction of others to you or as an idea. And his kind of metric is how effective are you as a communicator, and who's kind of coming to you to verify, to critique, to help communicate and educate, is a kind of a barometer of how successful you are. So tying it back, definitely secondhand dealer in ideas, easier, able to find things pretty efficiently. So I don't feel I need to say it myself, recreate the wheel. But but often there's the gaps, and I think a lot of people, feel that with certain things like safe and yourself and others. So yeah. Anyway, but me, that's kind of my draw card, or my bit of my background. Just a humble player who love these ideas and the lens it gives us to how better understand reality. And to me, you need to be able to do that to be effective in this world.
Yeah, I call it truth goggles. That's what this lens provides you with. The lens in the truth goggles. The lenses in the truth goggles. So would curator be a good description of you? Like, are you a content curator?
Probably not. I mean, I do dabble when I see gaps and things, but often it's like, say, for instance, like my YouTube channel, there's like hour-long lectures of Mises Rothbard, and then gems I see, and it's kind of condensing that. So I feel like, say, Mises Rothbard, Hopper, the originators, and Conrad Graf, I put it there as well. And then I'm standing on the shoulder of giants, really, and then kind of condensing, man, economy, and state, economic science, the Austrian method, down to like mere paragraphs where it's debating and engaging. It's not about the quote. It's kind of the excerpt or context that can a snapshot of that and the best refutation of someone's other point, and kind of getting pretty good at striking at the root of their misconception, even if they don't really understand themselves. And so collator maybe, but there is an intention to synthesize, condense or provide that stuff into other mediums as well. So like a praxeology podcast is kind of like backburnered long-term life goal type thing. So where I'm kind of fleshed all that out, it's just kind of putting in place a few other things before I kind of kick that off. But so maybe is the answer, I suppose, to that.
Is there a book in you somewhere, like where you sort of quote others mostly, but put it in a correct order?
There is one that it's been bubbling around for forever and a day, but it's more, probably struggle finding my voice to weave it all together. I could probably talk about it, I suppose, but it's like, I'm sure someone's probably going to do it anyway, but the strategy for liberty. So for forever and a day, there's a ton of literature around the world. It's like 70 years of this, the liberty movement. People who are far smarter, far better, far more educated, with far more resources, have had cracks at trying to improve the world, and from a libertarian perspective, and have succeeded in some places like Ron Paul, and then others like where the strategy has just been woeful. And I think there's a lot of people who come to the movement, maybe not from the Austrian school perspective, but like, oh, yeah, taxation is theft or whatever. Or, locally, I see this here down under, where there's all this knowledge of strategy and what's tried and failed. And people just read a book and they're like, okay, well, now we need to get elected. And how do we do that? And then it's kind of like the low tax liberalism kind of utilitarian cost benefit analysis, like policy wonk kind of style approach versus a radical principled, like anti-state, Ron Paul message, who's like an abolitionist. If you want to make a historical comparison of like the abolitionists are all, is about ending slavery, and then there's a William Lloyd Garrison quote, an abolitionist, where it's like, essentially, we'll always convey it should be abolished overnight, like whether it will or not, we'll always contend it should be. But then there's like the practical political concerns around like transition and whatnot. But someone needs to hold that barrier high, that banner high. And, often some libertarians, at least locally or whatever, those who maybe Cato or, there's others in US examples. I'm sure there are many around the world. They don't nail it. And then it's funny, you often see someone say like, Millet, who gets like a ANCAP radical abolitionist approach gets elected president of Argentina. And then all these guys locally kind of, you're crazy and like, attacking the Puritans and stuff. Then it's really everything that he did essentially was like the Ron Paul Rothbard caucus, and then essentially the template that Ron Paul used, whether he knows it or not, around like anti-state coalition and anti-war yeah, a whole bunch of stuff. So yeah, it's forget the tangent I've gone down here. Yeah, that's I guess the approach I take.
Yeah. Some of these the people who call themselves classical liberals and stuff, and then like trying to form political parties to influence this or that law. It's sort of like trying to cure cancer with a Band-Aid, right?
Yes.
They're not getting to the root of the problem.
No, not at all.
But you mentioned one of my favorite books there, Economic Science and the Austrian Method by Hans Hermann Hoppe, which I urge every listener of the Freedom Footprint show to read, and everyone else too, for that matter, because that is sort of like it goes so deep into the methodology and why the methodology of a priori deductive reasoning and first principles is superior to empiricism by definition. And that book really opened my mind. That and Rothbard's The Ethics of Liberty, which is another eye-opening book. But I think ESAM, or Economic Science and the Austrian Method, is my favorite because it's so dense and it's so powerful.
It is. Sometimes I've said you almost. I don't think you can call yourself an Austrian if you haven't read it, and that's a hard line type thing. I don't think it's necessarily a great place to start, like because so much would just be too dense to get fit in anywhere. But if you've read a few basics or like even intermediaries, for example, like Herb Ireland's Choice, primer on Austrian thinking, his recent book, the Bob Murphy's Choice, obviously Economics in One Lesson by Henry Hazlitt. There's David Gordon's, I got on my bookshelf. It's Economic Reasoning, Lessons in Economic Reasoning. There's a few other kind of good intros, and then at some point, just tackling that when you feel like you've got a pretty good grasp of it, and then it'll take you to the next level. Couldn't rave about it enough.
If you want a good introduction, there's a very underrated book called Praxeology by Knut Svanholm. Have you heard about this one?
Yeah. Exactly right. Exactly right.
No, Hazlitt's book is great as well. It's not as pure as some of the other Austrian thinkers. Hazlitt is a bit more like, he's like Hayek in a way, in my mind, like a bit more. It's not this purist individualist perspective that
it doesn't really touch on the methodology or like epistemology, like that as clear cut. I felt the value was coming from initially one of my early books reading is even that was not being as like hardcore pure, was still like a mind blowing thing, in terms of like a broken window fallacy, the seen and the unseen, like even just like that's all you're taking from it, or you see the sound like full unemployment, goals. And it's like a textbook of, I guess, like his writing for the New York, like he used to write for the New Yorker or whatever, not New Yorker, New York Times or whatever it was, where it was probably seeing a lot of the mainstream just commentary, the errors, like fallacies just over and over. And so I think he's like specifically done that really well. But yeah, you're right, there's probably better in terms of like formal introductions.
Yeah, it's more like practical examples than rigid theory.
Yes.
From my point of view, like the obviously the best tool for freedom that we have in the world today is Bitcoin, and for several reasons. And there's a good case to be made for why that is. So in your mind, what are the most common misconceptions about economics that people have? And with Bitcoin in particular, like some people say that, the miners set the price, and you hear all sorts of strange misconceptions. So do you have any examples that you hear more than others?
There's been like kind of a list, and I think it was in Libera's podcast, kind of went through some of them. Some come and go, right, in terms of how like understanding the value of metaphors and analogies, and they're great. They help kind of like memify or like help someone understand something. The trouble is when some start getting taken literally, or like that's the scientific approach, and this is what it actually is, like, and then I start arcing up a little bit. So whether some of those being like, it's digital property, there's a list, and like the say Bitcoin is violence, so Bitcoin is a weapon, is so I had a massive rant about that, but then now it's almost, I hardly see it at all. and then there's going to be nuance about it. You want to dive into like, well, they're trying to make like a potential Second Amendment argument or like a First Amendment argument, blah, blah, blah. Like, to me, the whole frame is ridiculous and not necessarily now these days anyway worth smacking down, because it's almost like it's kind of been forgotten, because I think the prime pusher is kind of gone. So and there's digital energy, like Bitcoin is a battery type stuff where like it actually stores energy and it that is actually being transmitted, as opposed to like, store value or, from a purchasing power perspective. And it's like, it's taken from this idea of concept where it's not actually stored, but it's an analogy of source. But then when someone starts taking it literally and like using powers per kilojoule or whatever, or like there's some pathways that can go wrong with that. And that's probably another one.
I use that analogy in the Sovereignty to Mathematics, the battery thing, and I've since learned not to use it anymore because it's too flawed. I mean, it's not even apt as a metaphor, I think, because it's more confusing than clearing things up. And I do get that everything in Bitcoin is sort of a metaphor, because you're trying to take something completely new and abstract, and you're trying to use language that people understand to describe it, like wallet, for instance, which is more of a keychain. And even the word blockchain is confusing since it's been hijacked by all these charlatans.
Yeah. Time chain kind of pivoted to where...
which is also flawed, but better. I think just to differentiate the real deal from the copycats.
Yes, that's right. And it's no longer crypto; it's Bitcoin, right? And there's a variety of different things, and then so kind of choosing your battles as well slightly, and it's ever evolving like language. So and partly like being so recently at Bitcoin Alive, speaking about Bitcoin maximalism in one lesson, and the part of the intro there, it's like, well, the Marxists coined the capitalists, the German historical school coined the Austrian school, and Vitalik essentially coined the Maximalists. And so it's like, is there a better label? Potentially like monetary Maximalist maybe, but it's for what it is. Like, I think it's kind of like, say, libertarianism, the word was also like kind of captured by us in the sense that we did that to the opposing side, perhaps to say it's more so. And whether it's like just adopting that because it is taking pride in that. But descriptors like now we're monetary a Bitcoin maximalist, where it as the idea of Bitcoin being, given the laws of economics, like the commodities competing on the market and then tending towards the most saleable good in society, which is a commodity, can be becoming that is money. And so understanding there's Bitcoin and there's everything else, it's like, okay, well, is your coin, quote unquote, going to be better than Bitcoin in terms of its network effect, and also as a result of its monetary properties and how sound and revolutionary they are? Okay, then well, it's going to go to one, turn towards one, and if it's not going to be yours, then what's the point? And it's like even some of the privacy bros, which I'm kind of, I'd say, part of, Monero and stuff, where it's a common thread, and part of this is for the talk was whether you're a pre-coiner, no coiner, pre-coiner, shit coiner, spammer, scammer. The common thread is economic illiteracy, essentially, different flavors and different fallacies people kind of fail to understand. And so the part of the talk was kind of, instead of attacking, going directly after some of the stuff, it was more putting the pro case forward, and a real trying to, in one lesson, inoculate or enlighten anyone who is part of those groups to understand the epistemological approach, the difference in methodology that the maxis take, which is under like Austrian economics pipeline, understanding that. And I like to once that kind of, there's a very short format to condense that even more. I think I'm planning on doing like a longer form kind of recording. So maybe, yes, a content creator in that sense when that comes out. But it's there's definitely different issues you kind of need to nail down with these non-maxis.
When I wrote my second book on Bitcoin, Independence Reimagined, I tried to boil down like the futility of trying to replicate the experiment of Bitcoin, because I found it's so hard to express why this is futile and why this is stupid. But the thing I came up with was something called the one-shot principle. And it goes something like absolute digital scarcity, or whatever term I used. It's flawed, I know, but was a discovery rather than an invention. It cannot be discovered again by people aware of this discovery, because the very thing discovered was resistance to replicability itself. Oh, it was absolute mathematical scarcity in a sufficiently decentralized distributed network. That was the premise. But it cannot. The point was that it cannot be discovered again by people aware of it, since all you've done is discovered a way for something to not be copyable on the internet. So what would be your take on that?
Yeah, it reminds me of like the summary of kind of like, so yeah, it's when scarcity iconograph kind of talks about it, like there's, scarcity has as a word as well, like has that the challenge of people like, oh yeah, I've got an idea and like, oh, that is because I'm the only one who has it or whatever, that's scarce. And it's like it's scarcity, like you've tried digital scarcity. It's not really that. It's more like rivalrous. So he's kind of evolved to using the word rivalrous, whether it's rivalrous or not. Like our ideas are obviously not. There's no necessarily conflict, whether like you communicate that to the world. I can have that idea. You can have the same idea now that I've passed it on per se. There's no conflict directly with that, but private property, in the real world, like physical world, yeah, then there's potential for conflict. So what a part of the summary I had to like give at the Bitcoin Live talk was giving an executive summary, having to start at the end, because you can kind of go from first principles and like kind of elucidate it all and then down you go, but tend to lose people. So one of the executive summaries was kind of just starting at the conclusion and for what Bitcoin was, and it was more or less like a rivalrous digital commodity on an open source monetary network. And that, I think, kind of is essentially another way of reframing your kind of summary there.
Cool. Okay, for those of our listeners that have no clue what we're talking about here, like I'd like to rewind the tape a bit and like go back to something Robert Breedlove told me in a conversation, and that was like Austrian. Well, praxeology is to the subjective what mathematics is to the objective, which is I love that framing, because that sort of sets the two disciplines apart, like the both a priori axiomatic insights that you get about certain aspects of reality. And the thing to understand for people is that these things are not, you cannot argue with them. You cannot argue with 1 + 1 = 2, and you cannot argue with minimum wage laws are bullshit, really, if you deep dive into praxeology long enough. And I think that the book you mentioned by an author who also used to work for the U.S. military, I know that you've been debunking those theories often, because like there's a confusion here between physics and human action. The people think they are first principles thinkers, but then they introduce physics into it's also the Bitcoin is a battery analogy, why it's so fucking bad, because there's this distinction between people's subjective valuations of stuff and the empiricist sciences such as physics, where you observe nature and you draw conclusions. Could you give your best explanation of the difference between the realm of Austrian economics and the realm of the natural sciences? What is the key differentiator?
Yeah, the term would be methodological dualism, but the easiest way to summarize that is it's a quote a quip that Mises kind of has, where you can throw a stick in the water in the pond and it floats. You can throw a rock into the water and it sinks. You chuck someone in there and they can choose to sink or swim. So like it kind of pithily indicates that like there's human choice is involved, and with human action. And yeah, from that, there's the difference of like, we're not like stones, we're not like atoms. There's no constant in human relations, like in terms of magnitudes, not so much. There is like we do know things that are certain. So like the world is kind of, what is it? There's certainty about uncertainty. I don't want to butcher this because it's like it's in economic science, Austrian method, like Hopper Nows, and he's also got a monograph with particularly on this, and it's late, so I'm trying to get the wheels in the brain going. But it's not there's not always radical uncertainty, so we can't know anything about anything, like nihilism type stuff, where you can't know anything, everything's always uncertain. And the opposite extreme, where we don't know everything. There's no absolute certainty for everything. Like whether the sun rises not or tomorrow is like an empirical question, it might not. But whether like then there's a few other takes that we know from a human action perspective that actually we do know for certain that I will use means to obtain certain ends, like whilst I'm alive. And then trying to attempt to refute the a priori of communication and argumentation, or Hopper's argumentation ethics. It's like you're essentially using means, your voice and whatnot to try and argue against it. And it's like there's a possibility of or not, profit and loss. It kind of goes into, in particular around like, it's irrefutable, or you're the status of like what's an axiom. It's like when you prove it to be true whilst you're trying like to refute it, essentially. So like, you are acting whilst you're trying to deny that the human action axiom exists. Now, there is a few like rationalism really just, it says, or like the example you gave a little bit earlier around where it's, irrefutable. It's like, you can trace that praxeological reasoning back to like the human action axiom. And it's like, if they're in that process of deduction, there's anything that there is a flawed premise or something like that, then it can be pointed out. And Mises kind of has this quote where it's like, to the positivists of empiricists that don't bother trying to do that and like go back and logically, point out where that error may be. They're essentially like the equivalent of, it's like the 17th century philosophers who didn't pick up the telescope to indicate that like Galileo was right and they were wrong. So it's the kind of equivalent. But also, then Hopper has a take as well where like mathematical, like, say formulas, you reference like maths, and it's a priori, where, so like, not doesn't require prior to experience, doesn't need involve experience. But with that, the revisiting and like impact, like trying to adjust that formula if it's wrong is like a priori, like an approach. So it's the positivists, empiricists, their approach is like it's a methodological monism. So they only see it as a scientific method, and that's had great success. Like in the natural sciences, we're not against the scientific method in natural sciences, but they co-opt that and they try and apply that methodology to the social sciences or to human action and human nature. And that's where the mistake comes about. Hence, like, though they do their modeling and, they're based on BS premises that are flawed. And in particular, how that translates to economics, you have a profession where ignoring the Fed funding, a lot of economists, but trying to reach models and perfect competition from an neoclassicals school, and it's just all generally the premises are wrong and they're basing off on flawed approaches. And you got things like the ideas of utils, the interpersonal comparisons of utility is possible. Apparently, it's not. It's impossible. But they give you a util and you run the models, and you get some kind of outcome. But it's like, just the minimum wage is correct or is helpful in this instance, and it's like no, and we can show that a priori, prior to experience, we don't need to run all these tests, and that is essentially what Hopper kind of gets to with the key difference between the Austrian school and all other schools of thought, so like the Keynesians, Marxists, Chicago school guys, is that the Austrian school. Conclusions are given a rigorous logical kind of verification of from that process, the axiomatic deductive method approach, as opposed to the scientific method approach. You don't need to go and run tests to kind of prove it to be true.
No, and evidence is completely futile. Like, cannot prove nor deny these axioms. Like they are true regardless of any quote unquote evidence given for one position or the other. And if I remember economic science and the Austrian method correctly, Hoppe says that the empiricist view, like the empiricist says that nothing is 100% true in the world. We can only make, like, the map is never the territory. We can only make approximations of the truth and get closer and closer to something, but never an absolute truth. And what's so beautiful about that section in the book, that he points out that assertment is an absolutist statement. Like that is, like, if you say that there's no such thing as an absolute truth, you take that for an absolute truth, and therefore the argument destroys itself. And it's such a beautiful way of, like, debunking very basic notions. And like I remember, like, tumbling down this rabbit hole and finding out more and more of these truths. It's like you realize that during the 20th century, there were great scientific breakthroughs, and the ones you hear about are like quantum mechanics and the theory of relativity and stuff like that, stuff in cosmology and stuff with quantum mechanics. But you never hear about this. Like in the middle of the last century, there's like a whole new branch of science, which is like profound in every conceivable way, and we can point out how suboptimal the way we run things right now really are, like in all of politics. Like, and it's just so fascinating to me that this is so overlooked and suppressed. Even I don't know how much I buy, like, conspiracy theories. I try to not like if. I see this in a lot of Bitcoiners, that they as soon as they realize that the state is lying to them, they cling on to whatever Alex Jones is saying immediately, and they believe in lizards and stuff. And I don't. I try not to do that, because I think that's just as lazy as doing whatever the state tells you.
If I want to jump in, I'd say I went down those rabbit holes as well, but the Austrian school, and like instead of go watch this documentary, and it's like dealing in the empirical world where it's like, hey, try and convince you, here's some quote unquote evidence that proves it, to be true. Whereas almost a futile approach where compared to you're carrying around, like, praxeology is akin to applied logic, where it's value free, it's descriptive, it's is-based, it's not ought, it's, value free, it's, what is it? It's essentially, if X and Y remains unchanged, then Z will result. That's like the formula. And then, like, okay, what's actually applying or not? And you kind of like matching that up, and then, like, it helps as a mental tool for, like, being descriptive of reality and get real knowledge from. But yeah, as an approach, like, you don't need to go, these rulers are doing A, B, and C. It's like, no, the state is an institution is institutionalized aggression. Monopolies are bad. And inefficient and ineffective. They're unjustifiable. Taxation's theft. Blah blah blah. War is murder. Da da da. Like they're far more like concrete, rock solid. Trace back to the human action axiom, irrefutable. And so that I found is always far more powerful than, these people are doing these things now. Rothbard, you don't want to discount that stuff as well. Like there's value to often. Like trying to pinpoint who are the bad guys and what are they doing. But I agree with like eschewing the kind of the conspiratorial stuff, especially if you're trying to convince anyone.
No, it's kind of hard to know whether it's the system itself that creates these bad incentives and therefore bad people, or if the bad people create the bad system. Like, where do you draw the line? Like, it's kind of hard,
I imagine, or like, probably, ebbs and flows more or less, or, working unison. Like it is hard. Yeah, it's hard to draw where that line is. You're right.
We're thrilled to introduce our new sponsor, the BitBox 02 Bitcoin Only Edition. BitBox. It's fully open source, Swiss engineered, and Bitcoin only, forever. The device only supports Bitcoin, which means less code, less attack surface, and improved security for your Bitcoin. Check out the BitBox 02 Bitcoin only edition at bitbox.swiss/freedom
and use code freedom for 5% off.
Next up, Wasabi Wallet, the desktop wallet with CoinJoin built in so you can preserve your privacy.
Ooh!
It's easy to use and open source, and their recent Juggernaut update included loads of upgrades and new features.
Oh!
They even added support for Bitbox. Go to wasabiwallet.io and download Wasabi today.
Okay, so let's try to bridge this to Bitcoin. Mises regression theorem. Can you give us your best explanation of Mises regression theorem?
Yes, let's have a crack. So historically, like the classical economists had issues with like trying to determine where the value of money comes from, and it was conceived as being like a circular kind of argument. Well, people value money because you can buy things with it or whatnot, right? And so the idea that Mises came with Mises regression theorem, like you can trace that back like from one exchange to the other, where it would go back, and the element of time was the thing that's important, where he picked up that at a certain point in time, it was before it was a medium of exchange being used to facilitate trade or like instead of being better than barter and solving the double coincidence of wants. There was essentially a non-monetary use is the kind of classical interpretation. So historically, like gold or whatnot, for whatever other reason, it had a particular use case, and is competing against other commodities. It had the best monetary properties, and it kind of rose to the fore. And then at a certain point, got used as a monetary premium, and so was being used as a medium of exchange. Now, so it's like at a point in time, it's like Mises goes back, and it's like, yep, it's no longer a circular argument where people just value money because it's getting used. It was used for other purposes. Now, originally, there was a bit of contention from like, well, how does that fit with Bitcoin? And that was partly one of the sticking points for me early days, where I was not anti, but like, it didn't have that like an objective use value or an objective exchange value, like a purpose outside of being money. But the thing who convinced me I was wrong was Conrad Graf, and it was pointing out that actually, if I'm not doing this justice, look up, it's a Bitcoin regression timeline little clip. And he talked about it when I had him out at the Mises seminar 2013, like talking about Bitcoin then. Essentially that it's actually the best illustrated example, the historical capturing of the Mises regression theorem in real time, where you had period of like 2009, like from early days Bitcoin, where there was no monetary like price on it per se. It was, a non-collectible digital object that, may be speculative in nature, and it wasn't being used as a medium of exchange. But I think, and then it progressed in 2010 and 11, where then pizza guys as a kind of then the price kind of used, maybe more speculative, but there was a price that was kind of attached to it essentially. And then some actual preceding 2011, like a medium of exchange, using it to buy certain things. So it kind of goes through that very clear steps, and Conrad's got an excellent breakdown of like the actual people, so like that were around at the time, then what their thoughts were, were about it, and it progresses, and it's fascinating to see, and that's essentially what convinced me. Yeah, I was wrong. Where it's not actually Mises regression theorem doesn't invalidate it. It actually kind of verifies it. I mean, it's all about must. Like that's how it must have happened. So from Mises, and I rate it.
Yeah, and I think the regression theorem itself is so misinterpreted, because like you use the term objective use value, and of course there's no such thing, right? It must have had a subjective utility to its first seller or buyer, to the first guy willing to buy it.
Yeah. So what that is, it's like purchasing power. Another word for purchasing power, or Mises talks about like, say, an objective use value. So like what is it? Like an oven is like, and that's heat or something like. So it's like a non-monetary kind of property thing, but different from intrinsic value, like objective. What's the word? Like value. Yeah. So it's a slightly nuanced thing, but yeah, I'm probably not doing justice for elaborating on. But no, it's a good pickup.
Yeah, because like objective use values, it sort of implies the labor theory of value somewhere, right? Because it's all subjective, and even what constitutes a money or what constitutes any homogeneous good is also a subjective thing. So like, where do you even draw the line for like, this is money and this is not? Like, that's also subjective in nature when you really try to like first principles the shit out of this.
Yeah, and it's like a few internet Twitter battles recently with like out of the kind of a shift. I wouldn't say that easy way to kind of categorize them, like people who used to think what I used to think, and yeah, they were kind of trying to pinpoint that where, and I think the difference is they're getting stuck up on tangibility being a thing, and so like when Manga talks about like commodities as being the example, and Mies and stuff as well. It wasn't tangibility that was the actual the reason for talking about commodities. It was talking about the pricing being similar. So for goods, so instead of like having unique items at a big difference in price range, it's like, okay, well, as a commodity, like commodities are a good example where the price is very similar, and that fits obviously Bitcoin perfectly in terms of like, say, from a gold perspective of like weight per ounce and whatnot, and similar. And I think that's why, like Satoshi himself, as an example, when like early days, it's like, oh, it's like a collectible or like a commodity. And then I think a variety of our narratives that are fairly, stuck, where it's like mining and, wallets and coins and all that. It's because it's banked on that truth a fair bit.
So is this Hayek like about the how money having another use case than a pure monetary use case actually makes it a worse form of money? So the thing that is making gold less useful as money is its use case in industry and as jewelry. Like, what is that theory?
Sorry, where my mind went there is that like I missed the point before, which was debating with this gentleman was picking up on that, like, yeah, but Bitcoin was designed like to be money and the best money, and so that leap of like trying to find a non-monetary use, like even you're thinking about the early cyberpunks, you can do it where the non-monetary value is like, like I've got to like think about like as a cool share as part of a stock, or like it's, I'm a cyberpunk or whatever, like they're non-monetary uses. Like, and so I think that's the thing where some find it hard to grok or understand, is like, even though, and it's like, well, that's subjective. It's like, well, yes, but but it's essentially still fulfills, I think, like the regression theorem. But yeah, in terms of like speaking about Hayek's point about, I don't think it's necessarily Hayek in particular, but you want to maybe ask that again? Sorry, my mom was...
No, I maybe got that wrong, but like, yeah, that other use cases for a monetary commodity actually reduces its functionality as money. I think it's even in human action, this stuff.
Yeah, and so that's why it's an odd one to handle with. It's often like only the particular those from the Austrian school kind of have that angle, who are still kind of caught up on, haven't done the work to understand what Bitcoin actually is, and that's often thing as well. Like if from an economic literacy perspective, like in shitcoiners and pre-coiners, like no coiners and all that, that's definitely an issue. But even if you have complete understanding of economics, you don't you have to do the level of work to understand Bitcoin, then you also won't get across the line.
Yeah, and if we go back to the starting point of Bitcoin in terms of Mises' regression theorem, I would say that like the first use case is as a collectible or as something, which is a monetary use case. It's the store of value use case, right? Because like if you have a collectible, you see value in it, and you sort of expect others to do at some point too, right?
That's exactly
I
what
would say that is some. Yeah, sorry,
but you're right. But then it's like several years though those guys go through, and like not like just in the wilderness, right? So and then it does happen. So either way, like it's how you want to categorize that. Whether it's like a non-monetary because it's like you're part of a cool club or whatever, cyberpunks or whatever, or yes, it's absolutely banked on the idea that it could in future, and that is fully monetary and liberty related and whatnot, all that, ticks the box too. So yeah, kind of goes through like there's 6 or 7 different types of like, things you could accept, and either one, any like there's a mix of all of them, or you could focus, like say there's absolutely some and none of others, but whatever it was, like it has happened. It is like, and I like to ask, like, at what point for these guys who are like still trying to, shit on Bitcoin in the sense of, from an Austrian perspective, like at what point would you accept you're wrong? Like, is it going to be used, like I asked, as a unit of account? Like if it gets to that point, will you accept you're wrong? And Excel, like you can jump in Excel. Bitcoin's already part of like the currency protocol, like whatever it is, like the international accounting standard. I'm fairly certain where you select it as a symbol. So I'm like waiting to dunk on old mate if he responds whether like that would be the case, because then he'd have to accept, well, already it's not a unit account now, but like if that's a part of the trajectory that we see becoming like, the Bitcoin standard, out competing the other terrible currencies, whether fiat or not. I think it's a matter of time, as long as, but I'm also like hesitant. There's talking about like not misconceptions, but like people talking about like, oh, Bitcoin is inevitable or everything is good for Bitcoin. I couldn't be more against that approach, where I feel like it's almost an attack vector in itself, where like the element of truth is like when Bitcoiners, who rise up and understand and, reality and can monetary like economics, where they can make good decisions around what, should or should not be taken, what the consequences of such paths being taken helps. But yeah, where like the inflation bugs, plural, historically there've been 2, as far as I'm aware of. And you need to go, well, at what point, the folks that think is like there's no it's just an opinion. It's like, oh, a lot of the scammers talking about, well, I point out the inflation bug constantly is because it draws them back to the point that, well, they talk about, there was consensus to change like that was an actual bug. Like if you don't have a frame of reference, like, well, Bitcoin has no purpose. Bitcoin could be a file storage system. Bitcoin is whatever it is. Like the system is what it says it is. It's like, well, then how do you know what a bug is? And like it's being exploited or not? And like there was consensus at that time that it was a bug. It's like, yeah, based on what? And I've never got an answer. Like the copious amount of times I just pump this out in response to stuff and you just get crickets. It's mind-boggling, because then it's like a reference of, well, do you think just it's an opinion that like 21 million is all right, like a hard cap is a thing, or is it like 198 billion Bitcoin, is acceptable? And it's slightly worrying when there's like a core dev current maintainer, like their response to that was like, in terms of jumping ahead potentially here, like Ordinals and stuff like where it's updating the documentation as opposed to fixing the bug would be considered like a valid fix. And it's like, wait, what? So it's, few things, issues there.
No, this is perfect. This is where we wanted to go with this, because like, okay, to summarize briefly, Bitcoin does not violate Mises' regression theorem. It sort of proves it, because you can point to an exact point in space-time where Bitcoin became not just a subjective store of value, but an objective medium of exchange between 2 people. And that is Laszlo's pizza, 2 pizzas for 10,000 Bitcoins. That's when it starts. That's when it becomes money in my mind. And this thing was designed originally to be damn near perfect money, like as perfect as you could get it, and ticking off all the boxes: uniformity, divisibility, transportability. I've talked about it as element 0, and this Jörg Hemstoff's idea of this being a massless element on the periodic table that cannot be destroyed and is scarce, and whoever finds the hash of the element, or the map to where the element exists, actually finds the actual element. All these amazing things about this new abstract thing that we've got now. The thing it's trying to do, it's trying to be damn near perfect money, as I said. So any other use case that you try to shoehorn onto that will eventually reduce its functionality as its originally intended purpose, which is damn near perfect money. So trying to say that there's such a thing as a rare set is so weird, because a set in my mind is it's more than just data. That's the whole point. It's something that exists within you. It's a way to measure the world. It's like saying that there's a rare inch or a rare centimeter. There's no such thing. There's only unspent transaction outputs, right? And they have a certain figure attached to them. But there's no such thing as a set. The whole thing about it is that it exists in your mind. It is a part of you because you are part of this network that agrees on this fixed set of rules that make people not cheat when thinking in economic terms. And it's just wonderful. And here, all of a sudden, you have cheap fiat suckers and charlatans and snake oil salesmen who try to sell you like a star in the Andromeda galaxy. They try to impose the concept of a rare set, which doesn't exist to begin with, because any arbitrary data you attach to anything in the time chain is attached to a transaction, not to a Satoshi. So the whole concept is false to begin with. And all of these sites that can debunk, that can transform whatever data you put into a monkey JPEG or something, they can go down. They are not part of the security model of this fantastic thing at all. They're just third-party bullshit thingies. So yeah, that's my little rant about it. What's yours? I'd love to hear yours.
Well, yeah, and I think part of it is, so the creator of Ordinals, like Casey Rodamore, he had a tweet a while back, and I think it was towards the start of the bull market, and he was basically admitted that, I mean, besides on his blog on Runes, where he talks about like 99.9% of these are like scams, and it's like, well, yeah, this is, you not made the case that this 0.01% is also a scam for what you've created through an exploit. But also he admitted that it wasn't part of Bitcoin, like the asset itself. And the challenge that I pipe back, like, okay, you're absolutely correct. It's not part of like the asset, Bitcoin itself, the rivalrous digital commodity. And then, okay, well, what's the point of the network, the open source monetary network, if it's not to secure or to send, receive and send that asset? And again, crickets, like it's to me, it's like pretty simple, Bitcoin, peer-to-peer electronic cash system. And yeah, specialization and division of labor is a thing. If you like, I asked a while back on Twitter as well. I was like, oh, do you think sprinkling confetti and sparkles on your gold coin would like increase its monetary properties, like, or destroy it? And I think, yeah, if you're on a gold standard, people are like, what the fuck is this? Like, and I'm not accepting that. Or would have to like, oh, I got to get this off it now. Yeah, and there's like discussions around like fungibility and whether like it impacts that type of stuff, whether, or as a lens that you have to kind of buy into, whether you're inadvertently sending those quote unquote rare sats around and like whatever they are, they're dick butts, on the blockchain time chain. It's like, guys, if you want to, and often they talk about, they try and angle in free speech terms. You get like, Shitcoin magazine going on around, David Bailey and stuff like, oh, like, Assange, like fraudulent something, like absolutely, that goes without question. But then like the trying to hijack or piggyback the spam case onto that, as if like on the time chain having, long-term permanent info, like our data on there, like images or whatever, is like a helpful thing. It's like, guys, there's a thing called BitTorrents. Like, you want to store your data like forever, and like, okay, host it yourself, but it's a good meme. So like, well, no, I don't want to store it. I want you to store it for me, like, cheaply. And then the part of the narrative is like, well, there's been other venues that they've been able to do that, Ethereum, Solana, whatever. But because those shitcoins, trending to zero, jumping ship, where they have put their, JPEG, their dick butt on, wherever it is, now that chain's like that coin, kind of a coin's irrelevant, and then loses monetary prop, like the value they can dump it off to someone else for. So the value prop is now out there and sinking ships, and the rats are jumping ship to come into Bitcoin, which, they get the part value of being like number go up, but also like the permanency element to it. And yeah, it's I guess that'd be one kind of rabbit hole rant for me. But there's a few different ways to think about it as well. Like often they kind of go towards the technical stuff, and it's like I think trying to keep it fairly simple. The analogy I originally had was like chess players, like where it's like a chess club. Essentially, those running Bitcoin, whether implicitly, explicitly, it's like it's an open source monetary network. You're part of that. You're running that. You're part of a chess club, perhaps with like a public element to it, so anyone can join. But there's certain rules around that, and consensus on what is that. It's almost like with the chess players. So we're all playing games or whatever in there in the club, and then checkers players kind of rocking up. It's not like they're in the corner doing their own little thing. All of a sudden they get like megaphones, having fun, having like a flash mob, organizing events and dumping stuff. And what it is doing is crowding out the real chess players, like the real organic growth. And the challenge is long term, like some other Bitcoiners who I kind of categorize as like not the scammers or spammers, but like enablers or chief enablers, where it's almost like, okay, these guys, they're exploiting a bug here. They're breaking the rules. We've obviously got to update the filters or fix them, or what other mechanisms there are to ask them to leave, or essentially kick them out, because they're checkers players in a chess club. And long term, that's going to ruin the chess club. Like you're crazy if you don't think that's going to impact it. And so what it is though is like those high prices or fees. It's not about the fees per se, but if we use economics and we understand economics, where it's on a counterfactual level or comparative analysis, like whatever those fees are, they're higher than they otherwise would be. And that's pricing out or crowding out real chess players or real Bitcoiners who would join, whether third world, whether cheaper, like where fees are, make it more viable for them there. And yeah, so it's an angle of, and sometimes like, pushing on the chief enablers a bit more, where they're like, these guys got checkers players are in there, got megaphones, like for the halving. I'm sure like Runes are trying to do that again, organize some intention and high fees, and then like make various other arguments. But it's you guys are literally crowding out the real use case for Bitcoin, and no one else signed up to like essentially have store dick butt JPEGs on their nodes and their properties. So yeah, anyway, it's a bit of another rant.
I'd love to take try another spin on that analogy, because I love the chess analogy, because Bitcoin, as we said before, is just an agreement on a fixed set of rules, and so is chess. Chess is an agreement on a fixed set of rules. The last time chess was changed was in the 11th century, when the passant move was introduced, where you could en passant. So it hasn't changed for a very long time, even though there are now great big chess institutions like chess.com or the International Chess whatever, who can try to change the rules, but they're trying to change the rules won't. The majority of chess players will still play by the old rules that they know that there's a consensus around. So it's very analogous to Bitcoin in that sense. And I view the shitcoins, like Bitcoin Cash, for instance, is a chess being played on a board with 64 times 64 squares instead of just 8 times 8. And there are very few players that play that game because it's a pointless game. And it just makes the game more expensive. It makes it, you need way more space to play it, and people don't want to play that game. You have chess Theorem, which chess Theorem is where the rules are changed with every move, and you can do whatever. You can program like nobody gives a crap about that. And chess Nero, which is the metaphor for Monero, is like normal chess, except no one knows how many pieces there really are, and every move is hidden from everyone else. So there's you can't really tell what's going on. But this is, to me, the ordinals here, they are, okay, so the miner is analogous to a great big chess as organization or a chess institution that starts a chess tournament. And all of a sudden, they put weights on the chessboards that the players need to remove by hand in order to play the game. And they insist on putting these weights on there because there's a weight salesman outside that off-band gets paid to put weights on the tables. There's something like that. It's another attack vector, and it's like these actors are so bad that you're messing with like the best form of civilizational organization tool that ever existed in the history of mankind, and you're fucking it up.
No, you're right. And it's like it's like, oh, well, because like we'll wait out the pricing, like wait it out in terms of like, okay, well, I often ask like, well, give a timeline for the, like as a chief enabler, like when's long enough that you think fees are gonna, like high fees are gonna price it out? It's already been a year. What is that? And we can go revisit there for like them directly. But even then, it's like it's never going to get a price out because like from these scammers, spammers, like those that are going to try to pass it on to dunk on the next fool is like if someone said like $1,000, like it was $1,000 transaction, or like in terms of the price of the fees that are being sent, like you would be like, oh, we'll pay $20, like $1,000 of value being transmitted, like $20 fee or whatever, $50, like the percentage of that, like okay. The opposite though, you're trying to compete against someone who they don't care about the value being transmitted. They'll like say $995 that gets as a fee and $5 as like the remainder of the value being transmitted. That's what the pricing you're actually competing against. And it's like, it's like not going to happen. Like, yeah, then it's a question around, well, like, okay, getting rid of the discount, will that help or not? Or like, whatnot. But it's on the face value of it. Like, I don't think there's ever going to be like pricing it out. It's like, okay, again, how long? It's already been a year, seemingly growing in terms of like, or adjusting to the amount of where arbitrary data can be put. And it's essentially like, okay, often the other objection is it's, there's a cat and mouse game where you do one, you whack, fix one filter and like, or they try something else and you can put arbitrary data anywhere else. It's like, yes, that's essentially that's well understood, but it's like a nirvana fallacy of instead of understanding that like spam, you can't ever get rid of spam, but that doesn't mean you shouldn't be taking steps like to mitigate it. And the very obvious and very easy ones. And also on terms of like looking historically, what's been successful is like 2014 op return wars, where there was like there's a period of like Counterparty, others like Satoshi Dice, like for around with Core. And their approach was like, no, we're going to play this cat and mouse game and we're going to claw you. It's like, all right. And then essentially rug pulling the VCs and all that who put funds into, all right, well, we're going to use dApps, get decentralized apps on Bitcoin and do all that type of non-monetary specific stuff. And instead, like their reaction pushed that towards become essentially Ethereum. So it's like, well, what could do as a social response, like again, now it achieved the same result, but it's an interesting piece around, well, yeah, I don't think the current core maintainers potentially are as clued in. This is an interesting point because like, so from an ignorance point, I'm not sure whether the OGs like cyberpunks like I'm sure they had that more implicit understanding of economics to make Bitcoin what it was and to maintain that. Now I think it's less overt and less in your face. So you have the BIP process, for instance, Bitcoin improvement protocols, where like there's many that are there to change it. But I don't see. I was like BIP 2 was essentially lays out what you need to kind of cover in that proposal. But there's absolutely nothing around like, well, is there trust that's reintroduced? Like, how does this improve Bitcoin's monetary properties? Is this impacting the asset directly itself? Or is this like the peer-to-peer electronic cash system, like the peer-to-peer system is the network? Is that what the improvement's about? Are there any trade-offs? Like, what are they? Like all these things that you would think would be fairly explicit and vital, like this needs to be answered as to whether the BIP should go ahead or not, aren't. It's not explicit at all. It's almost up to the economic knowledge or literacy of the devs, which from what I've seen lately is not great. And there's a kind of concern, I think, from my perspective, like I and others have seen where there's a bug that's being exploited and it's not being fixed. Like, okay, well, why? And you kind of go down some rabbit holes, and it's actually very eye-opening in terms of how, like, I think as an issue or threat or not ideal. And it's like the topic of, sorry, we're going over so many places here, but like the topic of then like dev funding interesting one is like, okay, well, there's no strings attached from some certain organizations. It's like, well, yeah, but they're really only funding you as a dev because they like what you plan to do, and it helps them explicitly, but no strings attached. Or is it the plebs rising up essentially as number goes up, becoming more involved, and the self-interest instead of maybe like getting rid of 9 to 5, you've got such wealth that you can spend to protect your asset that you're currently with. And so is that like a thing that happens as a result? And then whether like, I'd like to hope there's like, Sailor and other institutions who understand the monetary use case and kind of help rise up to protect that against, an asset that it is worth it is. Like you're crazy naive if you don't think there's it's already being attacked, and that measure isn't just going to be like the state with like a $5 wrench. It is like I would be surprised from the bad actors that we've seen with like either they're useful idiots, or there's some with who've like their own state backgrounds in dark areas that even if it's completely like there's no safe funding, there's no like this is just bad VCs and all that, it's like it's actually worse because it's almost they're doing the state's job for them. So yeah, it's the it's the challenge that we all currently face, and I think it's addressing it directly, but also indirectly is helping kind of expand, like spread the knowledge of economics and understanding, because that can, for any people, it's just ignorance or like I'm helping, I'm building. It's like, yeah, but you're not building anything good, and it's actually taking away from the value prop of Bitcoin.
Yeah. So way I see this is it's pretty simple. Either Bitcoin works or it doesn't, and time will tell if it does. It's still somewhat experimental. It seems like it's working, and there's always a case to be made for Bitcoin conservatism and being pro-ossification, at least in the long run and at some point. But also, like, Bitcoin is not backed by energy. It's backed by human action and people making choices. There's always a choice behind every move. And it becomes tricky when stuff like this kind of spam attack happens, because like our resolve gets tested. And just as you say, like the way to fight it is to do the other thing that is also possible, which is filtering these things out and pushing for, things like ocean mining too.
I took up my own mining with Ocean specifically so I could, get the satisfaction of filtering spam. And geez, it's a fun thing. That I'm having fun. That's the filtering spam. It gets you kicks, and like it is, taking you're right, action around supporting exactly what I think Bitcoin is, and there's that Ocean, things like Bisq, I kind of use, and using the tools in other ways, like where and that's partly another impact where this kind of decentralized exchange, there's 4 on-chain transactions currently. I kind of try and push them to make there's a single on-chain transaction, I think, in the works. Like Bisq 2 has recently been released, Bisq Easy, and there's a long-term plan to do that. But if fees higher, like there's a higher impact for those that are using Bisq decentralized exchange to get non-KYC sats in Bitcoin, but the spam. So like that's another layer to it as well, like pricing out like people who are trying to engage and transfer, use Bitcoin.
Bisq, that's an interesting subject. Can you tell us a bit more about Bisq? What's the TLDR on Bisq?
Bisq, the TLD is like, I feel like that's the exchange that Satoshi would have used, where there's, it's kind of what goes back to 2014. I think Bisq is usually be like a Bitcoin Square, and then it kind of condensed to BISQ, Bisq. Yeah, non-KYC. So the summary is, I'm trying to keep it too long. I did speak at Do Bitcoin Alive, talk about it like last year. For those that are interested, and it wasn't so much the how, it was like why you would use it. But the thing about it is like, there's a 2 of 2 multi-sig, like an escrow. You need Bitcoin to engage, but it's, I guess the real quick walkthrough of how it would work is, I've got Bitcoin. On the exchange, I want to say sell Bitcoin. I want to buy Bitcoin, and you're going to sell it. I'm see your transaction. You've set the parameters around. You put the Bitcoin that's verified on chain. You've got a security deposit there. I put forward a security deposit. you've stated how you want the funds, whether it's like pay ID, fintech, cash by mail, meet in person, there's a litany of them. And then I see those terms, I accept them. Basically, essentially a smart contract kind of happens where we're engaged. I can then see your details and then I go, great, I've started the process. I've paid, transfer the funds as needed, which is often like say fiat or cash by mail or whatever. You then go, great, I've now got them, I've received them, and then I release the Bitcoin. And so from a state perspective, it's like, it's fiat to fiat. It's like, or cash by mail or whatever. There's no, it helps, there's a decentralized exchange essentially where the real price of Bitcoin is more or less where with centralized exchange, there's KYC, know your customer, there's threats, there's risk in terms of state knows everything. And then like also your details being leaked, which is not great, which is, those hacks kind of happen and stuff as well. So there's the kind of some the too long don't read TLDR there.
Yeah. And how does it differ from like HODL or Peach or others?
I haven't used Peach. There's things like others use like RoboSats as well. So I couldn't tell you the particulars. All about that non-KYC sats though, like partly reason for mining with Ocean as well. So it's for HODL. There's a good chart that's kind of got like the ticks and the crosses from them from a perspective. Like, I mean, it's using Tor natively. What other differentiators would there be? It's colored Bitcoin as a way to think about it. Like there's BSQ, there's a DAO, decentralized autonomous exchange. So you can kind of engage, verify, open source. And they're trying to make it Bisq 2 is like a more multi-protocol thing. Bisq 1, there is essentially, I think, been close to perfect, but it's a UX, like you need a reason to, it's not as an easy UX kind of thing. You kind of need an incentive to understand. I'm not a tech guy though, so anyone, I think if you've got a real reason to dive in, just bisq.network is definitely, it's a good world to be in. Yeah, I think just that's essentially the exchange that Satoshi would have used, more or less peer-to-peer electronic cash system. And it's essentially this decentralized exchange. That's what it is.
We're now partnered with the Bitcoin Advisor, your best choice for collaborative multi-sig custody. The Bitcoin Advisor guides you every step of the way, from taking self-custody of your Bitcoin to securing it in their multi-sig vaults. Estate planning and inheritance is built in, so your loved ones can have peace of mind.
And you know what the best part is? Me and Luke are Bitcoin advisors. So you can contact us. We can advise you about Bitcoin and Bitcoin custody, how to make custard, anything really. We're Bitcoin advisors.
So visit us at thebitcoinadvisor.com/freedom or send us a DM or email to get started.
Contact us within 2 weeks and we'll throw in a free set of steak knives. Maybe.
The show is also sponsored by Orange Pill app, the Bitcoin-only social network where you can stack friends who stack sats. Make local connections and find all the nearby meetups, see what's going on in your area, and connect with Bitcoiners around you. And now, with a brand new merchant section, it's easier than ever to find and connect with local businesses that accept Bitcoin.
The best part about Orange Pill app is that you know that it's high signal because you're paying for Orange Pill app. And so is everyone else. There are no Asian ladies asking you how your trade is going on Orange Pill app because it's not a trading app. It's a dating app. Is it a dating app?
So download the Orange Pill app on Apple or Android, send us a DM, and start building your local network of Bitcoiners.
This conversation has been fantastic, and honestly, you've already hit on the main topic that I was interested in, which is the shitcoins on Bitcoin whole thing. I think you hit on everything I wanted to ask you about. Maybe just a little bit of kind of my take on the situation generally. The couple of nuances that where I agree with you, but I think there's maybe I've got a slightly different perspective on a couple of things. The fee floor situation that I see happening with that, the one aspect of the way that this stuff might get priced out, I see number go up being a faster way for these types of transactions to get out of the way, because it's really a demand problem as opposed to a supply problem as I see it, because these scammers are only making these transactions on the blockchain because they expect that someone is going to buy them for more Bitcoin than they pay in fees, right?
So if the fiat price goes way up and Bitcoin becomes harder in fiat terms to acquire, then, well, okay, you might get a circular economy of Bitcoin whales that are just trading monkey JPEGs between each other. That sounds fun for them, I suppose. But it's not going to be a huge pool. So that's the only place where I'm maybe a little bit optimistic, is that if we get number go up sufficiently, maybe there won't be as much demand for this stuff. So first, I'll just get your take on that, and then I've got one more aspect to that I'd like to touch on.
Yeah, it's definitely an interesting take, and I think from what I've seen, so I'd say definitely number go up has been the last, it's been around for a year at least. We've seen kind of the bull kind of kick off, bull market of sorts, and even with that though, Binance recently canned NFTs and flagged with runes. I'm pretty sure that anyone who's has got their stuff on their network or whatever, get it off because it's kind of closed down. So yeah, with a lot of comments saying, well, why? As a value prop, if there's money to be made and Binance is going to make it, it's not from a perhaps ethical perspective or whatever, they've done that, which they, or they should have, and what the pivot is there. And so I think there's been numbers, probably seen that, where there's number go up from a number go up from a fiat perspective in Bitcoin. And then, okay, they're one of the largest, centralized exchanges that have kind of taken them off. And so whether the buy-in's not being that great, or even if, they're kind of pausing, they're regrouping around runes or whatever it is, I think they're doing Binance stamps or something that is another thing. And this is the thing, you can go there's all different types that have yes, there's inscriptions or whatever. And you can get into them, but I think at a higher level, it's using ordinals, an umbrella term. I've seeing others that talk about you got to be specific and accurate with it. But it's I think not necessarily going into the technical weeds here, don't need to do that. I think running things like knots as a different client to core, helps immensely filter all those out. Data carry to zero, or there's all different angles to it. But in the Ocean template, running that as well. So with miners, where it's not just at the meme pool level, policy, it's also at mining pool. Mining is essentially running it and filtering it out at a block level. So yeah, I don't know, kind of going all place here, but yeah, it's interesting in terms of how that would price people out. And maybe I'd be intrigued. And even then, I do think you're right, where they're not, and there's not, it is they're making that exchange. And the one way to think about it from maybe a libertarian perspective is your exchange A, you're minting it, you're selling, there's, NFT or JPEG, whatever, and I'm buying it, great. But yeah, it's third party C who is being sold on it that is not necessarily included in they're the ones who are getting rug pulled and dunked on and sold that they can own something in that's essentially, non-rivalrous, although they try and NFTs are kind of scammy by nature. They don't understand the kind of economic problem that's being solved is getting rid of scarcity. And they're almost trying to reintroduce it in the digital realm, but it's not essentially rivalrous, and it's parasitically living off Bitcoin. You could, and assets, that's part of it as well. You make your own, or, Audi coin or whatever, go do that. Why haven't you? Well, you can control the network and do everything you want. Well, because you need all the value proposition and everything of Bitcoin. And that's the other layer to it as well, where the technical arguments where it bloats the UTXO set that lives on forever and makes it bigger and harder to run nodes, and which is the decentralized aspect, which is important to Bitcoin for node runners and stuff. So yeah, there's definitely, I know I've kind of strayed from your original question, but yeah, it's hopefully I guess I'd want to think that high pricing would price them out, but with the discount, I'm a little incredulous.
You make a good point there, but I think the thread that I agree with throughout this entire thing is use whatever means to mitigate it as possible. Definitely, there's value in doing that, even if it's futile, sort of, in the short term. That there are going to be other ways to do it, and even if in the long run, there are ways miners directly mining this stuff. I mean, if you're going to have a miner mine an entire block of crap just for their own satisfaction, basically, and hopefully someone paid them. But it seems like at least a couple of these cases, they've been this proof of concept thing, and the miners just haven't cared about the fees they're losing.
Well, they do. So they do. Like, there's an element as well of like where there's a passive element to it. And so when like, okay, yep, miners getting quote unquote higher fees, and like, oh, they love that. But then when they're like essentially, if they are getting filtered, or they have the argument was always, well, that would then send people out of band, so like going directly with outside the meme pool and going to miners directly. And it's like those guys who are making those arguments have already done that. Like they've already jumped the gun, or essentially, if your case is that filters, so they often it's like filters don't work, but then now they've gone ahead and it's almost implicitly said filters are like working, so they've gone directly to like Luxor mining, Marathon mining. And part of that, like, so they've already started to single, like doing, stupid stuff where it's like art on the Marathon, art on the time chain, and from an organization perspective, it's like they signal themselves being adversarial miners. Then they're actively, encouraging a part, like attacking the network in a sense. And so we can respond to that in the same way that Marathon rolled out OFAC, like, essentially on behalf of the US government, I'm going to regulate what transactions get put on the blockchain. And the reaction from Bitcoiners was like, yeah, go fuck yourself, more or less. But like the social pressure, the social argument case against, and then they walked it back. And it's like, well, if all they care about is money short term, and that's like the narrative from the scammers and spammers for miners, like, well, these guys overtly walk back that the short term angle. And it's like, also at some point, as long as like, are you going to kill the golden goose? Like that's the risk of like, say, what Bitcoin is and the long term outcome. And you're, taking little, extra bits now, but are you shooting yourself in the foot? Are you like got a gun to the head of the golden goose? You're risking like blowing his brains out, like to get graphic here. I think there's a risk of that, and we should be reacting as Bitcoiners. It's not to these threats and overt attacks, more or less, in a way that is me doing something directly myself in terms of like mining with Ocean. There's not supporting that at a different kind of a client, making these cases like socially trying to help education like for economics wise. But yeah, there's definitely things that can be done, and we just kind of, I think, got to understand that and kind of wake up. And I think a few people are starting to wake up more. Definitely, that's the trend that I've been seeing.
Yeah, it's like you're willing to kill the golden goose for a Kinder egg, like one of those chocolate eggs with a toy in it. That's basically what they're doing. So you said something really great, Luke, about the problem being on the demand side and not on the supply side. So it's sort of like the war on drugs and why that isn't working, because you can't really fight the supply side. You need to fight the demand side, and you do that by educating people. So the way I see these, like you said, NFTs are scammy in nature. Like the thing people don't get, that this is an open public blockchain. I hate the word because it implies that there are more than one, but that means that everyone can see everything that's going on here. That's all the point. So owning an NFT is sort of akin to owning a star in the Andromeda galaxy. You can own it on paper, maybe, but you can't do anything with it. Everyone else can see it too. Everyone else can right-click it and download it. There's like, and this goes for these idiot tokens as well. It's just arbitrary data. There's nothing scarce about them. Like the scarcity is in the Satoshi, and it's not in anything else. And that's what people need to wrap their heads around if they don't want to be scammed and have all their money removed.
So my last question is concisely, like as possible, based on this conversation, what would be the way you would explain why Bitcoin is a monetary network? Sorry to rephrase this, because I think I mixed this up in my head with another thing. The reason why it's good that Bitcoin exists as a monetary network. Yeah, that's it.
Yeah. Why it exists. Yeah. I think that it's more hidden. So like if you look at money historically, like I think the monetary properties have been more in your face, and versus now and the network is kind of more hidden, like exchange, voluntary, you can't like necessarily see it. People see people exchanging, but it's like, it's gone after that, where it's flipped with Bitcoin, where it's actually the network in itself, the peer-to-peer electronic cash system is more in your face. So like the vast majority, I think, of the code is actually geared towards like sending and receiving and like cryptography and, time stamping and, hashing and a variety of all that to help facilitate the asset that is what it is, where it's like hard capped and a rival or a digital commodity. And so like, yeah, I think it's all about that. Essentially the peer-to-peer element it's like, why is it so good? Well, it removes the ability, as per Satoshi, like the trusted third parties is like, and I was in that Bitcoin Maximalist talk recently, was like, the executive summary was, what's part of the problem? And like, you can talk about endlessly like the status quo, monopoly of, the state exists. And then, central banking, fiat money, like legal tender laws, all that. And then, but what is that? And it's like dumbed down to a non-Austrian perspective. It's like trusted third parties. And so like Bitcoin solves a problem for trusted third parties. And the whole network is all about ensuring that and facilitating that and helping you send and receive. Like from a system perspective, like Conrad Graf talks about really well, is whereas you got like the unit perspective and there's the system perspective. You got Bitcoin, like the unit, where the error for a lot of Austrians and Peter Schiff in particular, if we're going to categorize it, is like they look at the unit in isolation. So they're like, oh, the telephone, like what's the point of this telephone? But it's like not connected to the network. So like there's no point of a telephone. You can't call anyone and send it or do anything with it, right? So the value proposition is connected to the being able to make those calls, send that money, receive it, to decentralized, permissionless. And yeah, so like all those things we often hear from others is why I think it's so valuable.
Yeah, I've heard a critique that some people say that Bitcoin is not peer-to-peer because it has to go via the miners and via trusted third parties. But the whole point is that you don't trust these third parties. You verify that what they're doing is according to the rules. And there's a crucial difference. Like it is a third party, but it's not a trusted one. Yeah.
Right. But partly you could say they might be corrected for like, unless they're mining with Ocean. So with Tides protocols at the moment, what I've been seeing like indirectly is that for a lot of the mining pools, I think Grassfed Bitcoin and Mechanic kind of talks about how like there's like almost two miners, and but where from a verifying the miner or the hasher, like verifying they're part of the pool, and then verifying the funds that they should be getting or the fees. Like if the other types of pools at the moment, they take out of band transactions, like do the miners then see that or not? How do you know that the pools aren't clipping? They like clipping some funds, essentially like clipping coins, like from a trusted third party historically. And so with Ocean though, it's different, where essentially like the coin, you get part of the payout, like the Tides, like you're part of the Coinbase transaction from them when they hit a block. And there's like with Strat V2, I think they're moving like already at or moving towards, but you can verify like I've got, with the address with them that the funds then get sent to, and you can like, essentially verify that there's no trust. There's not as much, no trust or not trust, enough trust compared to all the other pools. So it's definitely, like that's the way I think that's why Jack kind of helped, I think, fund Ocean or whatnot, was like trying to decentralize mining, or like some of those attack vectors or risk factors there. But then even recently seeing it's like out of all the current mining pools, it's like 41% or something like that of all them are sending to the same custodian. So 41% of current hash is like sending to one custodian essentially. So like as a centralized piece, that's also worrying. But yeah, it's mine with Ocean.
Yeah. Or I heard from that conference in Dubai a couple of months back that I don't remember the name of the pool, but there is another pool coming up that doing the same thing basically as Ocean. So it's getting even more decentralized. Like there are some alternatives that will other transparent pools are coming, and I think that development is very welcome. Like that's how we need to do this.
If we want to bring it first full circle, like I think it was a point that I wanted to talk about was it was like methodological dualism. So going back to that in this talk where we kind of started, we actually embody methodological dualism. So we are subjects. We're subjects slash objects by nature. So we can't reduce it to either or. So like we're not just objects like, rocks and stones, and we're not just subjects only where like our mind and detached from being an object and having a body like a person. So humans, we're defined by being subjects like the self and our bodies, objects. So yeah, we're objects by nature. That dualism is present. We are essentially, we embody it, literally embody it. So like the empiricists are trying to essentially argue that a methodological approach isn't valid when they literally embody it themselves.
Yeah, that's back to and this ties into Bitcoin mining as well. Like it's the energy is there and it's needed to secure the network. But if we don't act in a certain way, that all that energy is wasted and it was for nothing.
Hey, I think this is a fantastic place to leave this one. Been a great discussion. I would love to do this more often, again and more often. But for now, I think this has been great. I touched on a lot of key points. So, Conza, where would you like to direct our listeners and viewers to find out more about you and things you'd like to direct them towards?
Twitter, yeah, Conza, Conza is probably easy enough. Where else? I mean, hit up like the Mises Institute for anything, everything, free books, podcasts, all of that. Yeah, if you're from Australia, mises.org.au. It's got like the 50 plus lectures. Hit up Conrad Graff's Bitcoin overview and Bitcoin kind of technical and social aspects. So like recorded a 2013 Mises seminar down in Sydney. Yeah, read anything and everything from Conrad Graff is my like appeal to, and obviously not, but for appeal to him in terms of it just what's the summary? It's like it takes out a lot of the technical wording, but like simplifies it, but is super accurate and maintain. Like I'm a big sucker for accuracy, and partly it's the worst thing for a movement is to not be skillfully attacked, but like ineptly defended. It's a Bastiat quote. So I kind of taken that to heart. And that's kind of, I guess, part of the essence of why I'm fairly hypercritical, like of myself, but of others when certain narratives are out there that aren't necessarily accurate, because it's not necessarily, that's the worst thing for us as a movement, not to be attacked by like those that are, less done. So, really just that. Yeah. I'm very happy to help anyone with any guidelines for things you're interested in, critiquing stuff. A lot of things get sent my way, and always happy to help.
Yeah, just a quick add on there. You mentioned Bitcoin Alive a couple of times. So if you're in Australia or if you have the ability to go to Australia, this is a fantastic conference. I attended it last year, and that's where I met you. The only time I met you in real life, it was a delightful evening over a couple of pints. And I take it that Bitcoin Alive was just as amazing this year as last year, right?
Missed you, but yes, it it was great. It's a fantastic event, Bitcoin only. Yeah, it's a key, and you probably just, I guess, follow on Twitter so I can showcase the longer form version of that Bitcoin Maximalism in one lesson talk I've done recently, which is trying to cover off like essentially all the things that the scammers, spammers, and pre-coiners and stuff, shitcoiners need to know.
Yeah. By the way, any chance of us seeing you in an international conference anytime soon, like one of the European ones?
I've been to Hans's Property and Freedom Society conference like way back in 2014, like potentially on board around anything around there then, but no, with like Young One at the moment. We'll see. Well, maybe it's an occasion. Bring them all. So bring them all over. So possibly, I won't write anything off. Likely to be in the States though for work early Jan, and so might have a chance to kind of be around there. So the other side of the world. But yeah, Europe is great. as well.
Excellent. And if Conrad or Hans Hermann or anyone else is listening to this, you're of course more than welcome to the show.
Yeah.
And so go read Economic Science, the Austrian Method. Go listen to Conrad Graf. I've started to deep dive into that guy, and it's, as you say, amazing stuff. And don't forget to like, share, and subscribe, and brush your damn teeth and click the bell. And Conza, this has been excellent. Thank you very much.
No, I appreciate it. Thanks, guys.
Thank you. This has been the Freedom Footprint Show. Thanks for listening.